I was wondering whether to go with an hola, Stephanie, because I
Why?
am, because I'm in
Oh,
Spain.
yes. Hola. Hi.
Hola. The other night, my friend and I, we were going to go out to this area. And so I did some research and found a restaurant for us to go to that was on the beach, looked lovely. And there weren't many restaurants in the area at all. And because I'm in Spain, all my work is an hour later. So I normally stop at 1:30 for lunch, but it's 2:30 here. And we were going out at like 5:30 p.m. So I thought, well, I could be having dinner at 6:30. Lunchtime's 2:30. So I thought I will just have a smaller lunch. So I had a light lunch because dinner was supposed to be sooner. It's supposed to be. There's
Yeah,
already
it's going to
little
go
clues in
somewhere.
this story. Yeah, it's going somewhere. So we go down to this beach and it's lovely down there, but the place on the beach, it's more like a shack. And we looked at the menu and both of us were like, we're not really feeling it. So it's 32 degrees. It's boiling hot. I don't know what that is in, maybe 90. I don't know if I'm
It's
exaggerating.
hot.
It's hot. So we walk for about 30 minutes along the beach to the next town bit to try and find another restaurant. And I'd seen on the map there was a little cluster. And we get to that restaurant. The first restaurant is closed. The second restaurant, we go there. They only serve food at lunchtime. They don't serve food in the evening. And the third one is more like this tapas bar. And they were really rude and basically didn't give us any food. They didn't have a menu or anything. And they wouldn't bring any food out. We couldn't really communicate with them. So then we decided, well, let's just head back into the town bit. So we get on the tram, we head back into the center of Benidorm. And so I am getting really hungry
Yeah.
and I'm stressed. And I'm really stressed about being hungry and about the situation. And I was thinking, like, what is this? Because I can be okay with hunger if I know when food is coming.
Mm.
And there was this not knowing. And we got back to Benidorm and we couldn't get a taxi. And then we're walking, and I think we're looking for a taxi to be able to go up to where the restaurants are. And my friend is actually looking for another restaurant. We have this whole misunderstanding as well. And I can feel myself getting grumpier and grumpier. I was really noticing as we're walking around because I'm so hot, I'm so hungry, and I'm so stressed at not knowing when food comes is coming. And eventually, of course, we did get to a restaurant at like 8:15.
Uh,
And of course, it was fine in the end. For
keep
me, I think
going.
it was just a really interesting reinforcement that there is something really significant for me in my psychology about not knowing when food is coming. And that I think was a bit of a trigger.
Mm.
And of course, today we're going to talk about anchor meals, not just maybe the actual practicality of anchor meals, which maybe we will talk about, but also there's a psychology around it, which
Yeah.
was what I was highlighting there.
Yeah. I, I would say too, and I don't know if this was your experience, that attached to that psychology is a physiology of it as
Yeah.
well. Um, because the reason that so I didn't come up with the term anchor meals, a client of mine did back in 2021. And we were talking about we were she kind of referred to it as these anchoring parts of the day that kept her anchored in the day and kept her anchored in herself, with the reliability and the regularity of these meals. And when she put it like that, like I thought about how the anchor is it is psychological. There's something about like understanding that there's a reliably food is coming, but that for me, and maybe this is more of a restrictor experience. Well, let me know that the physiology too is also very dependent on that. So when I haven't had a meal in a certain number of hours, especially in the beginning, first several years of recovery, my physiology would kind of panic. And so my psychology might feel angry about it or grumpy or kind of like, ugh, like nervous, but my body too did. Like it would almost, it would get, I would almost go into like, activation. Like I would feel myself getting like very jittery and very, on edge, from a physical level when food wasn't coming as much. And we've talked before about the peeing analogy and like the closer the bathroom is, your psychology does something with that, but so does your physiology, right? You start like peeing my pants. I'm like, the closer I get, like there's some attachment there. There's some connection. So for me, that anchor meal concept it's a psychological and physiological safety that some of us, particularly those of us who have eating disorder histories, um, need.
Yeah, I would say that I can be quite comfortable with hunger. Let's say it's 5 p.m. and dinner's coming at 7 p.m. Let's say I'm at someone else's house. If I was at home, I might just grab something to keep me going. But let's say I'm at someone else's house, or I'm somewhere where there isn't anything else to have. But dinner's coming at 7. I'm okay. Like there's a little bit of just the physical discomfort, but there's no stress in my body. It's not physiological. But this time, I guess, with the psychology as well, and being hot and uncomfortable in my body, being tired. And then when I finally sat down at the restaurant when we were going to eat, as soon as I sat down, I suddenly had this moment where I was like, I'm not even fussed about food now. And it was
What's
only
fussed
when I sat
again?
down.
You can't be
Well,
bothered.
yeah, I'm not bothered. I'm almost like, I'm not even that excited to eat now, like I would have been. There was something I think about that
Mm,
tension, kind of the decompression when it's like, okay, we're eating here. This is the table that we're eating at. This is the food that we're ordering. Okay, everything's okay. I don't know if it was the stress and getting myself feeling a bit worked up because it was like I was hungry, but I didn't have an appetite. So I still felt hungry, but my
mm,
appetite went a bit, the
mm.
desire to actually want to eat in that
Well, that's
moment.
interesting because I feel like typically I've had issues with the opposite, but I can appreciate what you're saying. It's like the buzzkill. Yeah, it's like you went up and then came flat down. Would it be helpful for us to talk about what anchor meals are?
Probably.
So they're
How are
not,
you using? Yeah, go
yeah,
on.
like they're not, it's not an intuitive eating term or anything like that. It's something that it's the basis of my binge recovery course. So in module 1, I talk about anchor meals. As such, there's been some people who've gone through my course who are podcast listeners who are in our community. And I think like the word I don't know how much it's prevalent out there, but in our little community, we talk about it, which the idea of it is that recovery from the binge restrict cycle in particular, but I would also, I'm not leaving out permitters because it's also relevant to more than just binge restrictors. But the nuances can, and we'll talk about the nuances of it, can be different a little bit between the two. But it's having meals at in a window of time that resembles a circadian rhythm of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between. So my anchor meals and snacks, the way I used them and the way I talk about them in the course, this is not a rule. Everybody can do their own thing, but it's a jumping off point, is to have like breakfast. For me, this was always between 7 and 9 a.m. Snack somewhere between, around 10:30-ish or wherever in that spectrum. 12 to 1 lunch, mid-afternoon snack, or even a fourth meal around 3, 4, dinner between 5 and 7, and then an evening snack. Which sounds prescriptive, and we can also talk about the way that might feel to the rebels. But the point of it, and what I try to drive home in the purpose of it, is not about do it this way so that you do it right, so that da da da. It's really like the safety element of it. It's the kind of being able to say to the body and the psychology, food is reliable. Food is reliable. And if you skip a meal, I'm sorry, if you overeat, if you binge, the next one's still coming. So the point of the anchor meals is that none of them get skipped. Again, binge restrictors, this is more, I think this is I don't want to put my stuff on anybody else, but like, okay, for me, that was not flexible. Like I needed that assurance because otherwise I would have been like, I binged though at breakfast. I can't possibly need lunch or even my morning snack. But it was like, I'm having it anyway. I'm having it anyway because the slippery slope of starting to go down that road of compensation was exactly my problem. So it was like, reliably, this is coming no matter what. Even if we're full, the meal is coming, the snack is coming. And it was that like safety against myself, I think, because I know that I would have manipulated it. And it was just like it was almost like the mother who was, that maternal sense that was coming in and saying like, here's your food. I've prepared it for you. Like it's here, it's yours. And that was the reassurance I needed to not allow my inner rebel or my inner critic or whatever to take over that process and then bring me outside of into that more of those irregular eating patterns.
Interesting, because I don't think for me it ever felt like about safety. For me, what would happen is during the day, I'd be trying to eat less because I was such an out of control compulsive eater. And then come evening time, or even just come 2, 3 o'clock, I would then eat something and then it would just be harder to be satisfied. So I just noticed that actually, when I ate more earlier on, that for me was a big thing about bringing meals in more intentionally and more hearty meals
Mm,
in earlier in the day. It meant, oh gosh, when I eat dinner, I can actually feel satisfied, because I wouldn't, because I would just be bunching all my
yeah.
food up into one piece in the day. So I think that was part of it too. And also because I'd fallen into this trap for the longest time. It took me a long time to realize this and to shake it off, of thinking that I need to wait until I'm hungry to eat. I
Mm,
really thought that that was the solution to this compulsive eating thing, because the idea of eating when I didn't think I was physically hungry seemed ridiculous. And that's stupid. Why would I want to do that? Because I'm somebody who's out of control around food. So if I can not eat as much, then I should be taking advantage of those moments,
right.
because there's going to be other moments when I feel
Yeah.
much more out of
That's the
control.
logic.
And that I think was a big part for me with anchor meals, as well as like often getting to dinner time or something and I had no plan. It's the end of the day and I'm feeling, I don't know, I don't enjoy cooking. I don't enjoy food preparation particularly. And then I would be much more likely to be grabbing lots of different things because I hadn't given it any full thought. And I think that's the way that the concept of anchor meals, although I wouldn't have been using that language at the time, was helpful for me. But I never really planned snacks, as in planned when I was going to have them. I had things in the house that I could have, but I never ahead of time scheduled them in. For me, snacks have always been as and when I want them.
Okay. Um, to just clarify, it's not a pre-planned. It does not have to be a pre-planned meal. And I'm not suggesting you were even suggesting that. But that's something that I've heard misinterpreted. So it's not like you have to know what you're having. It's just the window of time of eating. So I didn't pre-plan anything when I was recovering at all. That I didn't like. That would have made me feel boxed in. It was more like I just need to eat in this time frame. That's when I need to have a meal. And by the way, sometimes that meal, especially in the beginning, was like 3 meals. Like it wasn't about a prescription for how much to have or even what to have. Like even combinations or anything like that. It was literally just this is what I'm eating. And I would start out trying to have like lunch. Inevitably in the beginning, it was like lunch. I would finish and be like, I want that all over again. And I would have that all over again. And I would then have a little sweet after. And it was a lot of food that I ate in that window anchor meal of lunch. And then it was like, oh, I'm full. Okay. And I'm still having that snack. And then I'm still going to have a dinner. And yeah, so I was over full a lot in the beginning. But that was kind of the point. It was like, okay, yeah, we're going to get over full. And then we're just going to keep feeding ourselves. Again, this is not permission to binge. It was more like trying to establish regulation, because when you're so in chaos, there isn't like your signals are just so crossed and disorganized. And so there's something of that as well. And when you were talking about like the day, sort of you'd arrive to dinner and feel like you couldn't stop eating. There's a science part of it too, right? About like the accumulation of ghrelin and leptin, the way leptin and ghrelin work in neuropeptide Y, like the way that the hormones actually organize themselves when we have less food for a longer period of time. And what happens then when we do open the floodgates, so to speak, is actually not necessarily, it's not a psychological process entirely. It's also physiological, right? Like that the compounding variable of like hunger, even if you eat enough calorically, like as a sum total, it's like the way that the distribution of those of the food is, looks throughout the day impacts the way that the body is signaling you to keep eating. So under that lens, even absent of the safety, absent of the rebel, all of that, there's just something about if I'm not eating in a regulated way, my hormones are building up in such a way that when I do eat, I'm going to eat more. Like I'm going to binge. So even just looking at it like that is also a compelling piece of information. And it was for me. It was like, oh, okay, okay. This isn't all just the way I want it to be. This isn't like, well, it should make sense because if I'm putting this much in every day, that should be enough to last me. It's like, no, my body cares about the distribution.
And I just want to comment on the planning piece, because your and my food setup at home would look very different. You've got a family of five, so therefore you have a lot of choice and variety at
Mm.
home. So there is a sense of not having to plan. There's always some planning every time you do a grocery shop. I think you have a lot more different things that you can put together and make
Mm.
different things up. I think my situation was living on my own. So therefore I didn't have a whole load of variety. It's not possible to have that kind of level of different foods and choices in without potentially there being a lot of waste.
Yeah.
So there was always flexibility because I'm such a resistor to planning anyway. So there's always flexibility, but it would probably only be a choice between a couple of meals. And like now I use the Gusto boxes. And so when that comes, there's normally three different meals. So the flexibility is just which one I'm going to have on which night. And that could vary a bit between how late am I working? So how much time do I have to prepare it? Some days my lunch is a bit earlier, so then I might want a bigger dinner. I might want to have it at lunchtime if my lunch is later. All of those kinds of things. I think planning sometimes sounds like, okay, you're deciding in advance what and how much you're going to have.
Mm.
Or if you're not planning, you're just doing everything on the fly and just
Yeah. There's
grabbing
no,
whatever's most convenient. And there's a whole scale of what planning looks like.
yes. And there's also what works one day might not be what you need the next. With the concept of anchor meals, there's not a prescription for any of that. Like, so you and I have talked about the different senses that we get from even just in this conversation of what it might mean to prepare. It's like your needs are different than mine because my resources are different than yours. My context in my kitchen is different. So because of that, like factoring these things in, absolutely we factor these things. And I've had, clients be like, can I do it this way? Or like, what about this? And what about that? And it's kind of like there's room for all those shades because it's not like, no, it has to be this way. The only thing that I would say is, and again, not even has to be this because it's going to, and we can talk about the difference between permitters and restrictors. For example, the question often comes up, what if I'm just genuinely not hungry in the morning and I'm a permitter, different than a restrictor? But the way that we work this individually is going to depend on our individual context. This is not a rule set. The part where I feel like there's a little, and tell me what you think of this, there's a little less flexibility is just in the timing. It's kind of like generally what we're trying to still do is regulate an eating pattern throughout a whole day so that we're not backloading the day. There's still something of that's like the core principle of an anchor meal. The other details, they're going to look all shades of the rainbow.
Yeah. Well, there's a biological advantage to eating at similar times each day because our ghrelin syncs up with our meal times if they tend to come at the same time. So then you will start to feel hungry at lunchtime just because that's the time that you eat. And that I personally, when I've experienced that, that feels really good because I start to feel hungry. And then when I eat, I feel satisfied. And it's not even hunger necessarily like stomach hunger. It's not that gnawing feeling. It's just that,
Readiness.
yeah, the sort of
Yeah.
readiness and like, oh, yeah, I'm ready to eat and I want to
Yeah.
eat and food is appealing to me right now. And it can be really gentle when there's, enough food coming in and it's coming in regularly as well.
I think sometimes the idea is that we shouldn't like that this is actually a counterintuitive eating. Like we should eat when we're hungry, stop when we're full. Like that should all be very like laissez-faire throughout the day. Like who knows when I'll be hungry, And I want to say that by and large, no, I don't. I'll say it for me. That just because I have a history of an eating disorder, that fact alone renders that style of eating the opposite of helpful. I'm not going to be able to do that, especially as I'm recovering. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm just not. My cues are disorganized. Having anchor meals is not a sign that you're not eating intuitively. Like it's not counterproductive to intuitive eating. Even if one day I guess now 5 years later, I could say, what would it be like for me to wake up and just sort of eat as I felt like it? I don't. I still eat my anchor meals. I don't want to change it. It works. Of course, it's not like but it's generally how my body wants to eat. If it didn't, I might be able to play with that. I might be able to play with that now, and I would trust myself to be able to play with that. But in the beginning, that would have been so chaotic. The regulation was in fact again, it was this foundation for intuitive eating. And that's not a failure if you have this kind of need based on your body's responses to hunger, or just the body's need for some kind of regularity that other people may not need. Like, other people may be able to just sort of wing their day. If they don't have a history of an eating disorder, that might be, their body might be cool with that. My body never was.
Sorry, that ended really suddenly.
I know, because I was like, oh, okay, let somebody else talk.
Bless you. It was really abrupt. It just made me laugh.
I've been doing that.
Oh, okay. I think because this episode was inspired by a comment in our community, which was asking how to implement anchored meals. If you're somebody who's been really trying to do the hunger fullness thing, or I don't know, you've been doing fasting or whatever it is, and meal times have not been a thing for you for a while, I think there's a lot of confusion about where to begin when people feel so out of touch with their hunger and fullness cues, or with that sense of regularity. They don't even necessarily know what they would want to eat for breakfast.
Yeah.
We do have an episode on I don't know what to eat. And
Yes.
that might be worth checking out. It was not that long ago. What we're on 100, it's going to be like 152.
Oh, really? I feel like 130.
154. So that's a good place to start. If part of your struggle with putting in anchor meals is because you don't know what to eat, we have a whole discussion on that and how to start figuring that out.
And again, anchor meal doesn't have to look like anything. It's not. It can. I think that I have noticed anecdotally that with permitters, people who identify more as permitters, having a some kind of meal combination, like the protein, fat, we talk about this in that episode, proteins, fats, carbs, yum, fiber, is helpful and can be integrated sooner. Whereas for a binge restrictor, like for me, didn't kind of like what I was having was like, that's the secondary thought. It's more just that I'm having something. It's more that I'm having what I want, or like having enough to, I'm just eating during these windows. I didn't have it. The choice was less important of what I was eating.
But also, if somebody did want support in figuring out how to start the regulated eating, if only there was like a course or something that people could do that might support them to figure some of this stuff out.
As it happens, I think by the time this episode comes out, it'll be like a week away. So the course that I run, the Stop Binge Eating course, formerly known as Binge Eating to Intuitive Eating, is takes you through the intuitive eating principles the way, like with more nuance, with more discussion about how we can actually apply them and how different people might think of them. Because we're all different and need different things. One of the founding concepts of it, though, is anchor meals, which is talked about in the first module. And I go into anchor meals and we have a discussion the first week about it. We'll meet every week. It's the course was designed for people who would resonate with this conversation. So a binge restrictor is someone who I imagine might resonate with this conversation. There may also be permitters who resonate with it to some degree, which it can be helpful for that. But it's if there's something inside of you listening to this feeling like that's kind of what I need, but I don't have or I'm afraid, or I don't know how to do this by myself. I don't know how to like trust myself to implement this. That's where this course would come in, because it doesn't expect anything of you. First of all, you don't need to like do anything. You can just take it in. And I think, we've talked about the power of concepts and just like hearing about things, learning about things, understanding how this might fit in, and then like wading your way through that as it works for you. I'm a big believer in that. But if this feels like, yeah, that's what my body is craving and my psychology is craving, is some kind of regulation with food that I'm unable to provide myself because I get too scared. That's who this course is made for. So I invite you to join, links below.
I think the breakfast one is definitely worth a mention. The
Okay.
thoughts on people who will say, I just find it really hard to eat first thing in the morning. I'm not hungry. So for some people, it actually turns their stomach, the thought of eating that early. What do you tend to say? What do you say, Steph?
Yeah.
What do you say?
I totally respect that. I feel like even having kids, it's interesting because my oldest, she needs breakfast every morning. Like It's just non-negotiable. She just needs it and always has. My middle is like, she doesn't really respond to breakfast. She doesn't want it. And this is how they've always sort of been. Or it's how they've developed. So I do respect that there are some physiologies that may not actually, maybe they just don't benefit from having like an early meal. Fair enough. I really do respect that. I think the question would become, is that something that feels like authentic and sincere? Or is that something that feels like maybe the body just doesn't understand the cues at this? Because I used to not feel hungry in the morning sometimes because my cues were just all over the place. Like I just couldn't feel hungry. Or something that you're going to manipulate and like kind of be like, okay, well, if I skip breakfast, maybe I could also skip lunch, or how long can I get away with this and make it a fast? Like, do those kinds of thoughts start to come up in the idea of skipping breakfast? And if you're susceptible to that, to consider that, like, okay, then for the sake of kind of almost like self accountability there, that having breakfast might be important right now. As opposed to just somebody who's like clearly just like, no, I have no problem like with the eat. I'll eat when I get hungry. I just can't even stomach. I think there's a big difference between those two scenarios.
And talking about it as an experiment is what I often do. So let's say somebody's not really a breakfast eater, but they're hearing about breakfast and they think, well, maybe I would benefit from eating breakfast. Sometimes it's a case of, do you feel up for trying it for a few weeks and then see how you feel? You don't have to go, okay, I'm going to start eating breakfast. And now you've committed to something for the rest of your life. You now have to be a
Right.
breakfast eater. It's like, could you try being a breakfast eater and see what the feedback is? See what that's actually like. Giving yourself a reasonable period of time to kind of gather some information. And I find that people are sometimes, yeah, they can feel a little bit more willing to give that a go. And it's like, okay, I'm going to experiment with this
Yeah.
and see what it's like. Because I like breakfast. And so I'll eat breakfast. I could also not because I don't feel massively hungry. If I really wait for stomach hunger to kick in, that would probably be about 11. But I found that when I do that, it can really throw me off for my day unless I'm going out for a brunch. And
Mm.
so I'm having a proper
Party.
big hearty meal with different components and things like that. Then it's kind of okay. But if I were
Yeah.
to just have what I might think of as like my regular size breakfast instead of a brunch, which for me would be two meals in one. Not because it should be, but just because that's how it would often turn out. Could absolutely squeeze another meal in if I want it or need it.
Yes, I agree. I'm the same way. There are times I'm not hungry for breakfast. I eat it anyway because it's almost like my body says to me, this is what I imagine that it's feeling. If I haven't gotten at least half of my day's worth of food by lunch or like soon thereafter, my body comes back for more in the evening. Like I just there's a repercussion to me doing that I have just noticed from experimenting too, and I don't think everybody's body's going to be like that. But it's what I've learned about mine. So it's kind of like there's a certain kind of practical eating that sometimes is the anchor meal where it's like I eat breakfast because I know that even though I don't necessarily might not want breakfast, which is fascinating, um, I know that if I don't have it, that ghrelin's gonna collect, and the end of the day is gonna be harder because my body seems to like to front load. Um, and again, learned that through experimenting. But there's another thing, another situation that might come up with this breakfast thing, which is maybe it's not even about what the body prefers or not, but maybe like a situation where it's like, well, I binged last night. Like I ate so much last night and woke up this morning and I'm still like so full. I can't even think about putting more food in, or I don't want to put more food in my stomach because I just ate all that last night and I'm feeling guilty. In that scenario, my thought is that's a scenario where that is the point of the anchor meal, is to have it even if the binge has taken place, because if for me when I didn't, it was almost like saying, okay, well, if you binge, then you can skip a meal. And that was
Mm-hmm.
slippery. That was exactly what a binge restrict cycle is. So I had to cut through that and be like, even if you binge, you have the next meal, which was frustrating and inconvenient. And like, I wanted to rebel against that a lot, but it was kind of like, I just had this, it was like, yes. And that's the point. That's how the body learns that food is coming, because it's not getting punished, so to speak, even if that punishment feels like intuitive, um, and not, not meant to punish, but still there's some part of me that would have read it as, well, now you can't have breakfast.
I think for me, I would have had breakfast a bit later. So let's say I was normally having breakfast at 8 a.m. If I woke up and I still felt full, I might have breakfast about 10:30. The minute I said something to myself like, I'm gonna eat less today, I'm gonna try to eat less today, or I should only need less food. The minute I made it an intentional thing to try to eat less, whatever that looked like, that was almost invariably gonna make me binge the next day as well. The minute I did that. When I really relaxed into it much more, and I was so much more compassionate after I binged, and I was just making a lot more sense of it, there just wasn't the same levels of shame. And I'd have my breakfast and I could just be a little bit more kind of intuitive. Sometimes, not always, probably more than half of the time, but not always, I might naturally eat less than I normally would the next day.
Mm.
But the minute that was the intention,
Yeah.
it totally screwed it up. So I'm
Yeah.
even cautious about saying that because then someone will hear that and then you try and make that your intention and then that's going to
Yeah.
be another thing. But that was my experience.
That's why I needed anchor meals, because I would have taken, yeah, I was the kind of person who would take that thought and like be like, well, I'm gonna make that work for my weight loss. Like that's just what I did with everything. So I had to put those, I just had to, it's just like, this is just the formula I need, because I'm gonna do funny things with my own my own rationalizations in the beginning.
We had a conversation recently in one of my groups about whether one person or another person prefers to go to bed feeling full
Mm.
or like not quite so full, if you see what I mean. So say they'd eaten a couple of hours before they went to bed, so they're not talking about going to bed hungry, but that levels of fullness. And I think it's interesting because I have worked with a number of clients who feel really safe when they're full, and that really does help them sleep. And so we've thought about that and talked about that together about what does that look like to just work with that and go to bed feeling full. Can that be okay?
Mm.
Because previously going to bed feeling full is only associated with
Right.
binging, right?
Right.
That's why. But what if it was intentional? So I think sometimes even when you're looking at something like anchor meals, for you, it was quite important that it was in certain windows of time. And there are very, depending on your culture, certain traditions about when those times might
Yeah.
be. I think being a little bit thoughtful about what would actually, one, work with you from a practical perspective. People who work shifts, this is going to be a challenge as well. And also, I have had people do 4 meals a day
Yeah. Yeah.
as well because they like to eat early and they like to eat late. And to have one meal in the middle of that, and like if you it
Yeah.
started to feel a bit messier. They were struggling to get everything that they needed in that time, considering veering off the path, but allowing that to be like really intentional according to your needs.
Right.
And if you can
Yeah.
make the breakfast, lunch, dinner thing work, then just
Yeah. It's like what
that's the
resonates for your body.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I have a client who does breakfast, lunch, and a really substantial early dinner. I guess that's still breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but like the timing of it isn't
Traditional.
traditional. Yeah. Um and she sort of like she's played with that in a way, and she's kind of figured out how what feels the best for her. And it's not exactly what the anchor meal structure would have looked like, because we started out in the course and then we worked together one on one, and we modified it a bit. But it works, and she's not trying to manipulate herself. You know what I mean? She's not interested in that. So it's just really like, again, the sincerity of your own motivations matters. We have to have some self-awareness about that.
And in some areas of Europe, the traditional dinner times are, in my mind, like insanely late.
Yeah.
When I stay with my friends in Grenoble, they always have dinner at 9 p.m. That
Yeah.
is their dinner time. Last night I was out in a restaurant and it was 20 past 11 at night. We're leaving the restaurant and there are families in there with their big meals all arriving. And I'm thinking, 20 past 11, I'd be up all night. I would not sleep well.
Oh yeah.
No, not if I was having something like a full
Uh,
Chinese meal at 11:30 at night.
I don't know.
No, that would sit. That would, I wouldn't,
Yeah.
I'd be more likely to dream and I'd be less likely to sleep deeply has been what I would
Experience.
notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what I don't know what my body would do with that. I do know that in the times that I've gone to Europe and had later dinners, I do wake up the next day feeling like I don't want to eat until like 11.
Mhm.
But then I just basically push everything forward.
Yes.
But it's weird because then you're sleeping. You know what though? I go to bed early. My whole circadian rhythm would just shift in Europe. It just does. Because
Yeah, so
remember,
it's the
like I
same
go to bed
time
at
as
like
it would be in
9.
the US or something. Yeah. It'd be the
Yeah,
same time
that's
it would be
true.
back home,
That's
probably.
true. That's true. That's a good point.
Oh, yeah, it
Anyway,
would be because they're ahead. So
yeah,
really, you're just eating dinner at the same
we're
time as
just eating
usual.
dinner. That's right. That's why it works.
Yeah.
But my sleep cycle would have differed. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, all of that to say, I also think there's room for change on that. Like you don't, it's not like having anchor meals as a structure at one point in recovery. Doesn't need to stay that way forever. It can shift around. Your needs will shift around because your cues will organize. And then your intuition, all of these things, as they change, your needs may change. It's kind of just giving yourself a jumping off point.
Yes.
So is that it?
Probably. Probably. But if you want to get on Steph's course and you're listening to this at the time of um, broadcast, check out
Yeah.
check out the description below. I think you offer a little discount
I
for
offer a little
podcast.
discount for podcast listeners. Yes.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
code is, I made it, LAD listens.
Is this one of these things where it's like it's supposed to like tap into the subconscious, make people listen more?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
No, it just came to me. Okay. Well, thanks for having this
Yeah.
chat with us. And it wasn't a chat when it's one directional, but thanks for listening. And LAD listens. See you next time.
Bye.